Recording. You seeing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Look, hey everyone, and welcome to my talk. I'm Giles, and as Frank mentioned, this is all about the challenges of agile leadership. Before I begin, I hope everyone at this virtual meetup this afternoon is safe and well during this crazy, difficult time and is relaxed as possible. I'm humbled that I get the opportunity to talk to you all during this kind of out of lockdown period to a nice number of the CTO community and share this with you all. So, for me, this is a unique experience. So thanks very much to Barry and Dom for arranging, for Frank for standing in as host this afternoon. Thank you very much. Right. Onwards. So this afternoon's talk stems from my experiences, successes and failures, leading agile adoptions over the last sort of 10 plus years, working with executive teams that have both been united and also wholly disconnected, understanding the journey that agile leadership has been on to get where it is today. I'm going to be highlighting certain common challenges that agile champions and leaders frequently face in the workplace when trying to create an environment which allows agile to truly succeed. These challenges create the most amount of friction with our jobs daily and need resolving in the present before agile leadership in the future evolves further. As I will mention often, the Agile Manifesto has been around for nearly 20 years, and yet we are still experiencing issues with agile ways of working that we were facing back in 2010 or even earlier. Agile leadership in 2030 will be no different from now unless we resolve these challenges first of all. I'm passionate about responsible leadership, and I've spent the last few years trying to give back to our communities in the technology and agile space by sharing learnings, mistakes, telling the stories of the importance of having the right leadership from the very top down. I also believe that now more than ever, as we spend so much time with new ways of working due to the COVID and the impact that that's had, we need our agile leadership to be as successful as possible to make our organizations succeed. So the purpose of this talk is to look at some of the challenges that are limiting agile leadership from being truly successful in the workplace and uncovering some of the reasons why this is happening. So in understanding what and where agile leadership needs to be in 2020 and beyond, we need to understand where agile may be perceived to be today as it enters its third decade in the workplace. Now, I often share these kind of thought-provoking perceptions that are both from inside and outside the agile community at talks like this to see how they match to the experiences of the other experts and leaders in the audience. So, how is it perceived today? As a cult or ideology? As just about doing and not about being agile? As being too prescriptive and bureaucratic? As being fake? As only about implementing parts of the process? A tool for software development only? All about scaling and brands and methodologies and transformations and all these other amazing buzzwords we keep hearing? As the whole answer? As a tick in a box exercise? Just about qualifications? Possibly as agile theatre? So I'm here this afternoon to share some of the things I've repeatedly experienced in my career that limit the success of agile leadership in the workplace. And this is going to be a real opportunity for us all to collaborate and help get our organizations to overcome these same hurdles and ultimately to become more agile. Now, to understand why we need agile leadership, we need to understand why organizations want to become agile in the first place. So let's begin with why these same organizations actually aspire to be agile. Previous surveys by Deloitte and McKinsey show that more than 90% of senior management in technology organizations are giving high priority to the mandate of making these same organizations agile. Popularity of this way of working clearly shows that modern-day agile approaches deliver superior results compared to those of traditional approaches, and this is where that aspirational mandate is being driven from. Now, despite this, less than 10% actually consider their organization to be performing with any high level of agility whatsoever. According to a particular McKinsey global survey, more than 80% of respondents say their organizations have undertaken digital transformation initiatives over the last 5 years. A mere 16% reported a success. But what's even worse? Only 3% claimed successful, sustained transformation. Now, the results from the respondents who did report a success, the 16%, point to 5 categories in order of importance, all of which make a transformation more likely to succeed. And as we see at the top, leadership, followed on by capability building, empowering the workers, upgrading tools, and communication. Now, these categories suggest where and how organizations can start to improve their chances of successfully making major step changes to their business. But it still seems mind-blowing that nearly 20 years on, we are continually identifying the same criteria time and time again to make these transformations successful, but doing little about it to make the changes last. Excuse me. So this seemingly large delta between aspiration and reality has led to many organizations today claiming to be agile in one form or another, when clearly they are not. Especially if, according to the results, they do not have the right leadership in place to help bring about the required changes to improve on that 3% score. What is agile leadership? Now, I don't want to focus too much of the talk on this one particular topic, but I do want to share what I believe agile leadership is today, who an agile leader may be, and some of the attributes that I think personally make a great leader. Wherever you are on your agile journey, agile leadership is the practice of creating change that helps build a truly agile organization. Agile leaders will have a passion for learning, open innovation, developing people, and can create and communicate the vision of an organization. It's also the craft of creating the right context for self-organization within an environment where agile teams collaborate, learn from each other, get quick feedback from users, and are focused on quality and continuous learning. Now, these leaders do not micromanage the people, nor create total freedom. They balance the anarchy and the strict structures that are crucial in today's organizations. Developing, and possibly more importantly, maintaining this right environment is often hard work. These leaders focus on principles such as designing and improving the culture, facilitating teams to take ownership, coaching these teams to understand the agile mindset, promoting the learning and feedback from experiments and failures, and co-creating long-term goals with the teams so that they know what they are aiming to achieve. Additionally, these leaders have to operate well in a wide range of circumstances, especially new, changing, challenging, and often ambiguous situations. So, who in an organization is an agile leader? Think of the role of the agile leader as a placeholder for whatever you decide to call the role. It may depend somewhat on your organization and how you organize the work in your organization accordingly. An agile leader, for example, could be a coach, a senior executive, a product owner, even a project manager. Yeah, I said it. A scrum master, a release train engineer, a coordinator, etc., etc. The list can go on and on. One mistake I have seen happen several times: you don't necessarily need to go out and hire someone specifically as an agile leader within your organization. You may already have many agile leaders. So, for whoever is in the position, it is a critical function and needs to be a key part of an organization for any complex cross-functional endeavor that involves more than a handful of teams. The person or persons in that role needs to be motivated, dedicated, and skilled. Now, the reason I say persons is that the agile leader doesn't necessarily need to be one person. It can be a pair or even a small close-knit team, as long as they collaborate tightly and speak with one voice. While it seems obvious, these agile leaders need to not only be strategic, but also effectively lead in the present to address any issues or challenges the team may be currently facing. Agile leaders must also inspire creativity and innovation within employees, so that as the organization moves forward, employees are directly contributing to its successes. Now, you cannot rely on what worked yesterday to solve tomorrow's problems. So agile leaders need to use their experience as a tool, but mustn't rely on it solely to solve those problems. Agile leaders take pride in being resilient and creative in what they accomplish by ultimately being flexible and open to change. Agile leaders are those who can adapt to an ever-changing and uncertain environment. Now, learning from this prepares them to handle whatever happens next and ultimately makes them an excellent role model for others. Agile leaders constantly challenge beliefs and assumptions, even if sometimes that puts them in hot water, so that they can meet the needs of the moment versus clinging onto a cause that is perhaps already lost. And agile leaders need to navigate uncharted waters, ambiguity and chaos on a daily basis, all the while remaining fully connected with the team or teams. So, regardless of who is performing the role in the organization, agile leadership has an effect on that same organization at two distinct levels: the structural level and the behavioral level. Now, on the structural level, agile leadership affects things like processes, roles, responsibilities, key performance indicators, OKRs, and so on. And on the behavioral level, it refers to specific actions taken by those leaders in certain situations that are underpinned by particular mindsets and abilities. So, taken together, structural and behavioral effects mutually reinforce each other and culminate in an agile leadership experience that extends its influence across the entire organization. Now, talking of influence, the following points for me are key to understanding the role of an agile leader. Leaders and managers both mobilize people and resources and explain the vision. But that's where the similarities end. Leaders focus on goals. Managers focus on tasks. Leaders take risks. Managers mitigate risks. Leaders sell it. Let's see where this is going. Managers tell it. Leaders go against the grain. Managers go with the flow. Leaders motivate. Managers approve. Leaders inspire trust. Managers expect control. Leaders foster ideas. Managers assign tasks. And leaders innovate. Managers use what works. Michael Sahota wrote in a blog post last year, anyone can be an agile leader. It's about how we show up and what we value. It's not about a formal role such as a manager. So this leads nicely onto the challenges. And as I do often at meetups and conferences on topics that I'm truly passionate about, I like to share the most common, most experienced, possibly the hardest challenges that I see or face most often in my career, that are those limitations and blockers for me in my quest for being an agile and technology leader and enabling agility the best way as I can throughout an organization. I'm not necessarily providing the solutions for these, but I am going to share and highlight the challenges and some of the things we can do to limit them, which I hope you will all see follow a well-trodden path of recurring patterns, which then become opportunities for us all as an agile community and leadership community to help truly solve together. And I'm going to explain more about that as we get to the end of the talk. So I also hope that none of the challenges I'm going to talk about are new to any of the leaders here this afternoon. I expect a lot of you have suffered from some of these or all of these at some point, and you may actually currently be experiencing them live now. Challenge number one, where organizations wrongly claim to be agile. The term agile is often applied to organizations or parts of that have no substantive claim to any kind of agility whatsoever. Now, this usage wrongly leads to many organizations being called agile, even though they are still managed through traditional bureaucracy without any true agile leadership. This over-eagerness to self-identify as agile has created fake agile or agile theatre among organizations that misunderstand or simply choose to ignore the true application of agility. So to understand whether an organization is agile, you have to look beyond simply what they are saying, and you've got to uncover how they are operating. Some of the most successful organizations that have implemented an agile way of working don't even use the standard terminology of agile at all, or worry about calling themselves agile in any way, shape, or form. This is also known as agile without the label. Their business agility, coupled with great leadership, is an important reason why they have become the most valuable organizations in the world. So the uncomplimentary phrase, agile in name only, applies to organizations that have too narrow a focus and are only implementing parts of the agile processes while ignoring leadership, culture, structures, governance, and also without embracing the agile philosophy and values which are shared and embodied by naturally agile leaders. To avoid uncomfortable scrutiny, some organizations even cover themselves in agile camouflage, borrowing the ceremonies and vernacular of agile methods and frameworks without fundamentally changing their underlying work habits or having the correct leaders in place to change this. So these organizations are simply doing agile without truly being agile. There is often a lack of commitment seemingly throughout an organization. They don't understand why the change is happening and are not committing to what is necessary to achieve it. As mentioned earlier, this claim by organizations calling themselves agile can never be genuine if they do not have the right leadership, sharing that agile philosophy and set of values, enabling the required change and evolution. So to be truly agile, an organization today needs to operate in a very different way, with leadership, values, and norms all reinforcing that philosophy and culture. If you're an agile leader coming into an organization that is resisting change and operating by doing agile in name only, this is a substantial hurdle to overcome. It may even be impossible. Challenge number two, where agile is for the software teams only. Now, the Agile Manifesto and corresponding principles were originally written for the context of software development and was intended to address issues that software development teams were facing in the 1990s and early 2000s. The fact that the wording of the manifesto is limited to software development is less than adequate as a definition of business or organizational agility for today or the future, meaning that there's a very real need for the manifesto to further evolve. When agile processes are introduced or sometimes forced upon software teams in those traditionally managed organizations, without the right coaching or leadership, they inevitably run into conflict with other parts of that business that have much more bureaucracy and are less flexible to change. Organizations will still be behaving in exactly the same way in 2030 unless we work together to bring about a major change to organizational design and those current ways of thinking. Because the current version, and obviously that most widely shared definition of Agile, is all about software development, senior management often become confused asking, isn't Agile just for software only? I've been asked that too many times in my career. As I've personally experienced far too often, certain non-Agile leaders of an organization undergoing a change or evolution or transformation, or whatever you and your organization like to call it, think all that's involved is the software teams learning a new framework. Now, as an Agile leader, I've had to coach many senior managers and executives on Agile foundation courses to help them understand what it actually is all about. Therefore, understanding the Agile philosophy and being able to manifest those Agile values at all business levels is critical for the Agile leader to help build and grow that truly Agile organization now and in the future. So in arriving at this software-only perception without the right leadership and philosophy in place, Agile often ends up as just a couple of the pieces of the process cobbled together, maybe some sprints for development purposes, and especially with no adoption across the rest of the organization, often intensifying the idea that Agile is simply the coding part, which senior managers believe don't require other elements, departments, and actors involved in that overall process. This again creates a version of fake Agile within that same organization and limits the idea that Agile actually refers to the ability of that organization to rapidly respond to change and continuously improve. If you're an Agile leader brought into this kind of environment that is unaware it needs to change or is simply resisting it, you need to find ways and try different approaches to enable agility throughout the whole enterprise, the whole organization, and not only just have it working for the software teams, to ultimately remove large parts of this organizational friction. Now, this can be achieved by things like systemic coaching, sharing the why, learning from other organizations, introducing communities of practice and experience, finding your organizational champions, and creating, obviously, ultimately, the right ways of working. As well as possibly introducing other organizational changes, like beyond budgeting and new funding models for the finance departments, transforming human resources departments into people teams, and having them ultimately lead this organization with their broad reach across the entire organization. I personally have a hang-up with the phrase human resources. For me, it categorizes us all in the same way as office resources, hardware resources, computers, etc., etc. There will be many other items we as a group can add to this list. And I afterwards would genuinely love to hear and learn from those who have successful approaches to applying that agility throughout their organizations. Email address at the end. I'd also love to hear about the approaches that have been tried and don't work. The idea that Agile should operate across the entire organization, aka business agility, is not necessarily new, but it can only be a positive thing. I hope everyone here agrees. The Agile business can then become more adaptive, flexible, creative, and resilient when dealing with complexity, uncertainty, and change, especially in these times, leading to improved well-being and better outcomes. Challenge number 3, where Agile is disliked by the command and control gang. What's annoying about Agile to control-minded management at any level within an organization, but especially prevalent with middle or senior middle management in my own personal experience, is that it recognizes a very big problem lies in control itself, especially when this gang worships at the altar of conformance and are not flexible to adapt and change. This same group seem to have the loudest voices, but lack the authority to make the necessary structural changes and are given misaligned incentives leading to traditional behaviours to surface or resurface. Reconciling agile execution and innovation lies in giving greater freedom to those doing the work, being able to exercise their talents and creativity, but doing so in short cycles so they themselves can see whether they're making progress or not. Even worse for hierarchical control, agile leadership thrives on transparency. One of those dirty, not so little secrets of traditional middle management is that control thrives on non-transparency, especially when they continually follow the ideology of controlism from the top down. So introducing agile leadership means exposing all those non-transparent tricks that hierarchical managers play on their subordinates to maintain power. Is it any wonder then that agile isn't naturally popular with the command and control gang, and as such it will not succeed if they do not allow it to flourish within an organization? There have been many well-documented situations, you only have to go and Google it, where an agile transformation or evolution didn't deliver the expected improvements, or even failed and was ultimately stopped because of the involvement of this gang. Those who don't pliantly follow this group become an obstacle in their mind and not a benefit. With such defenders of controlism, who needs enemies? When advocating a new approach or way of working, it's natural to openly highlight the flaws of the current ways of doing things. It's not a bad thing to do. If everything were perfect, why should people listen to us? This is where some of that biggest friction comes from. Agile leaders and coaches have suggested many ways to deal with organizations that have a command and control management style. For example, by assessing if an organization is truly ready or not for Agile in the first place, before even thinking about whether there's a future for it or not. These same leaders also need to be wary of the damage from anti-Agile propaganda from this group, which will also limit the success of any Agile adoption. If an organization genuinely wants Agile and that leadership to succeed, then the hardest lesson for this command and control gang is learning to trust the leaders and the talented people in the teams, then recognizing when to get out of their way. It's down to us all to help guide and coach the best way possible to allow this to happen, and ultimately to help remove that resistance to change. Challenge number 4, where Agile is constrained by bureaucracy. One thing hasn't changed with the popularity of Agile over the last 20 years. There is still loads of pressure from the top down. Now, I hope you all agree, especially as we're here at the London CTO's meetup event, but I personally believe in an ideal organization, C-levels should, if not must, transform and promote the Agile changes too. And I've worked personally with some amazing technology leaders and mentors in my career who have done just this. And I'm sure you all have similar people in mind too who've done that for you. But I've also worked with those C-levels who haven't supported and promoted the changes, somehow believing that they know better, when I can tell you for a fact they clearly didn't. In many companies I and Agile colleagues have worked in, it's still often the case today where they revert back to the only processes and behaviors they know, believing that they somehow understand how to live better than those Agile leaders who look after the teams and the outcomes on a daily basis. Agile leadership will be stuck in a perpetual loop and can't evolve if we continue that experience and resistance and friction. One author, Gary Hamel, gave a vivid description of bureaucracy and this top-down pressure in a front-page Harvard Business Review article titled, "Bureaucracy Must Die," that summed it up as, strategy gets set at the top, power trickles down, big leaders appoint little leaders, individuals compete for promotion, compensation correlates with rank, tasks are assigned, managers assess performance, rules tightly circumscribe discretion. So, as such, these same executives are still focusing on snapping their fingers, trying to become agile magically, aka the Agile Harry Potter syndrome, often without any care or understanding the why, and hoping for a faster time to market, which ultimately never comes for them or anyone else, or simply choosing to ignore it altogether. Now, as I've experienced, certainly over the last 10 years, there are some in senior management circles, and please note I don't call them senior leadership at this point here, that don't understand what Agile actually is, and sometimes don't even want to understand. I once had a rather ignorant line manager as a CIO many years ago who used to say of the Agile way of working to others, "What is that Agile thing you do?" Even if I told him 20 times a week. I once got an apology from the people we were talking to in a very large meeting after he said it and walked away. Needless to say, less than 6 months later, he was no longer the CIO. Now, this same group sometimes mistakenly think that it's also some kind of anti-bureaucracy or voodoo, associating it with a lack of control or management, and sometimes a chaotic free-for-all, if you like, with no plan, which leads to a lack of coherent, coordinated approaches across that organization, i.e. no clear view of the changes, which together lead to the right desired outcomes. Or possibly through an element of fear. They believe they will lose control of the processes on one hand and of the products they have in the organization on the other, and not be able to make changes to them as and when they see fit. Senior management often experiences friction with new agile ways of working due to a lack of education given of the journey being taken, even if they are the ones who've mandated the change in the first place. Go back to the McKinsey survey. Or a lack of coaching to understand the why, or a lack of trust, such an important word, of the people who are responsible to deliver, or even simply due to a general resistance to change. Wrongly thinking it'll cost too much to implement, often due to the need of required roles to deliver successfully, even after streamlining teams to begin with. Or losing sight of the real goal, which is achieving successful business outcomes, not simply doing Agile as some sort of tick in a box exercise to say the company is now Agile. Big reveal moment, drum roll please. It's not all their fault. A fundamental issue for senior management is that the standard Agile vocabulary, born from the foundations of Agile with frameworks like Scrum, were devised purposefully to be unattractive to that same management group. I understand why that happened, but do not understand why it hasn't since evolved. One thing all Agile leaders and coaches have to be mindful of is that these same frameworks have offered little or zero guidance to those people who actually have to change the most. We, as an Agile community, at times seem to have completely missed the fact that the people who need the most coaching and support are those senior managers who are in charge. It seems crazy to believe, but I've only seen this being openly discussed for the last few years, yet we've been working in Agile ways for nearly 20 years. I mean, did we all hope this friction would simply disappear? We were going to get rid of all those senior managers, or were we, including myself, wearing blinkers the whole time? A lot of senior managers I know aren't actually actively fighting Agile. They haven't simply understood how it applies to their roles or how to perform those roles in ways that enhance that genuine agility across an organization. So, because of a lack of support and education for this group, iterative change has become so fast with our Agile ways of working that big hierarchical bureaucracies cannot cope. And in turn, that often means senior management cannot cope with the pace of Agile either. Sending commands up and down the management ladder is simply too slow and cumbersome, and causes further friction if not managed properly by those agile leaders and coaches. The voice of the customer, the most important part, is often lost in the battles up and down this same management ladder, with at times those at the top being so far removed from the customer and the work being done to even truly know what is going on, let alone understanding how to respond to it. They fixate on wanting to change things like organizational culture, but not in that agile way, producing 50-page IT roadmaps that'll be out of date in 3 months, without understanding that they need to change first of all and become supportive of what is going on already. If organizations are not careful, these new agile ways of working can wrongly become rediverted into yet another company reorganization, driven by the same senior management wanting to get control back over what is happening in the organization, creating even further change fatigue and making it less likely to succeed, being part of the 97% opposite statistic that I mentioned at the start. I've heard people talk of the soul of a department being ripped out with changes like this happening, especially when the agile leaders are let go. This invariably wrongly leads to a negative way of organizing, a woo, instead of a positive way of working, a wow, and will create even further friction within an agile adoption and make it far less likely to succeed. If I was a betting man and I could see the future, I would be able to make a ton of money right now on the fact that in 2030, organizations will still be operating the same way, as norms and ways of workings will still not evolve if we all here today are not leading this change right now. I kind of think this cartoon sums it up. Who wants change? Who wants to change? Now, actually, someone in the agile leadership arena, a chap called Mark Buchan, he actually created another version of this, which I actually prefer. Who wants change? Who's willing to change? Who's capable of change? The Business Agility Report 2019 preface stated, "The report is a sobering account of the obstacles along the way, particularly in larger organizations that suffer from risk-averse cultures, organizational silos, bureaucratic layers, workforce passivity, traditional mindsets, and above all, lack of strongly supportive leadership at the top." Now, this resolutely maps back to the results from that McKinsey survey I shared at the very start. To make any adoption, transformation, evolution a success, you need the right agile leadership in place. The hard truth today is that agile and traditional bureaucratic management still don't get along, and we all need to work harder to change this. Now, in repeated polls of people working in many different organizations globally where agile is implemented, somewhere between 70 to 90% reported tension between the way the agile teams are run and the way the rest of the organization is managed. Agile leadership throughout an organization is a lot harder than traditional leadership. If you're doing it right, you care a whole lot more. Often these agile leaders are the filter between harsh top-level objectives and truly trying to motivate their teams, making a difference and enabling delivery. Agile leaders must help organizations and senior managers understand that it's not a new level of anti-bureaucracy, that they will not lose control of their products, and understand that they need to help coach the senior management to understand what it is they are committing to, which I believe is a quote from Deming. They must also ensure they are providing the guidance required and advising the senior managers of the approaches being taken by the teams, bringing them on the same journey. And finally, They need to be part of the success criteria to help senior managers to become those senior leaders. An agile leader is by necessity someone who lives and models this agile mindset and philosophy, i.e. someone who's pragmatic, knowledgeable, flexible, open, respectful and responsive, not prescriptive and bureaucratic. So this leads nicely on to challenge number 5, where organizations have a closed, fixed, or traditional mindset. As discussed earlier, organizations that are very agile often shy away from the label agile altogether, or are moving away from a particular brand and are using their own homegrown words, which feels more genuine. The main difference between those organizations that can claim to be genuinely agile and those that can't is for a large part down to those adapting an agile mindset at its core, from its people and culture to its structure and technology, i.e. being agile, not simply just doing agile. Those leaders that adapt to the continuum of agile will see improvements over time versus those leaders that don't adapt due to their fixed mindset, where they go through the motions of just doing agile because of some wider company or management directive. If this mindset adoption doesn't happen, then that organizational culture will never improve, even if senior management thinks it'll be just fine the way it is. However, as non-agile leaders wrongly believe, the agile mindset does not simply see things in a polarized view, i.e. agile or not. An agile mindset is that set of attitudes that support a truly agile working environment and organization. And these things may include things such as respect, collaboration, improvement and learning cycles, pride in ownership, focusing on delivering value, courage and experimentation, and the ability to adapt to change. This mindset is necessary for agile leaders to help cultivate those high-performing teams who in turn deliver amazing value for their customers. This mindset is also independent of terminology, labels, specific proprietary processes, or even particular agile brands, and helps with fixing the perception of whether an organization can truly claim to be agile or not. If this mindset is cultivated by the leaders and nourished, the teams will experience amazing outcomes, happy employees delivering great value and great results. Ultimately, Agile is all about embracing that different mindset or philosophy. Agile is not a system, not a methodology, not a platform, not an organizational structure. In my experience, when people and organizations have the right leaders and mindset, it hardly matters what tools, processes, and practices they are using. It makes things come out right. Conversely, if they don't have the right leaders and mindset, it doesn't matter if they're implementing every tool and process and practice exactly according to the book, no benefits will flow. And again, I've experienced this more often than not in my career. The agile mindset is the environment within which teams truly flourish, enabled and supported by great responsible leaders. If we want agile leadership to succeed in the future, then we need to collaborate, evolve, and overcome these 5 challenges I've mentioned here today in the present as a priority, along with no doubt many others too. So finally, the journey for successful leadership. As I've already mentioned many times this afternoon, Agiles that embrace philosophy and set of values brought about by having that right set of agile leaders and ways of working, supporting the people and culture within our companies. Agile isn't a methodology to implement within the existing management framework. Agile is all about working smarter rather than harder. It's not about doing more work in less time, or as some people wrongly believe, doing twice the work in half the time. It's about generating more value and better outcomes with less work. You don't do Agile if you simply want the benefits. You have to be Agile. When you have the right Agile leaders and coaches, the teams deliver within a business model that generates value for the whole organization as well as their customers. As Agile leaders, our goals should not just be about implementing Agile. Our goal instead, as I mentioned earlier, is about enabling successful business outcomes. All said and done, Agile leaders are the key to enabling people and organizations to have the courage, knowledge, and belief to be truly successful. Parting thoughts. True Agile leaders embrace every aspect of agility. Set a clear vision that their team can embrace and own. Believe in their mission and live it on a daily basis. Build a culture of self-organizing teams. Create an environment that allows Agile to flourish. Focus on what really matters, delivering value. Help their team members take care of the customers. And finally, are awesome. So, as I mentioned at the start of the talk, the purpose was not necessarily to provide solutions or answers for these, but to share the challenges which impact how successfully that leadership can happen in our organizations today, which become catalysts and opportunities for us all as leaders to solve together, especially if they are still being pervasive within our organizations today. So this leads on to my last page. Final question and have your say. What is Agile leadership for you and what are your Agile challenges? On screen, you'll see a QR code and a short URL that will take you to a 2-minute Agile survey I'm running throughout 2020, where you can answer this and a couple of other questions too. The outcome of this research is going to be a report of the big challenges that are still affecting Agile leaders and Agile adoptions within our organizations, nearly 20 years on since the launch of the Agile Manifesto, and what we all need to do together to resolve them. It's going to be published in a white paper that's being sponsored in late 2020, early 2021. And I hope I can come back at a future event and share the findings from this, leading on to further workshops, projects, collaborations on overcoming these systemic challenges through our champions and leaders, helping to provide and share answers and solutions for them, and allowing these ways of working to simply become commonplace in our organizations over the next decade, enabling greater business agility and responsible leadership to be successful. Thank you everyone for coming and listening to the talk today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Giles. Thank you very much. I'll take questions. So if you want to kind of mute yourself and get my attention, I'll try and run through people and just want to get sorted. I'll start the ball rolling. So you walk through the 5 challenges. What has happened from your experience when you see an Agile transformation actually work? What is the one thing that actually makes it happen?
For me, I think it's the point I referred to not that long ago, a few pages back, where the adoption is actually company-wide, organizationally wide. Everybody in the company on the same ship, going in the same direction, all wanting to be a part of that success criteria for those successful business outcomes. And they don't necessarily need to have mastered the art of lean principles, Scrum, less, safe, etc., etc. If they are truly operating in an organization which is seeking fast feedback, learning to be able to iterate, inspect, and adapt from that as well, while trying to do the very best they can. Those are the types of organizations that I've seen having the most success right at the start, and the evolution that comes from that has been the greatest I've seen going forwards. Those organizations that somehow are mandated, you have to now become agile, ultimately are the ones that I've seen fail.
Cool, thank you. Any questions from the group?
Hi, Giles, thanks for that presentation. One of your slides had a true agile leader on it. If you could just go back a few steps, a few pages.
Bear with me. I'm going to just click back. Tell me where, this one?
Yeah, this slide. I think this is the part that always gets me. So when I look at this list, like, is a true agile leader, if we remove the agile from this title, this statement, this slide would still be correct, right?
Oh,
isn't this just about leadership?
Correct. And that's the point behind this talk today. And as I said right at the start, that leadership, and especially it sits with us as CTOs or technology leaders as well, to be part of that leadership capability, enabling that change, that evolution to be as successful as possible. You're absolutely right, and possibly even, thank you, Donovan, for a future talk. I may actually, as I put that page up, strike through the word agile and just say true leaders need to. I think it's absolutely key that we should be extolling these virtues to all leaders in all organizations.
So do we run the risk of then creating some kind of confusion within the community by like attaching this agile label to things that really, these are just best practices that everybody should be following?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As I said at the start, and from a great conversation I had with one of the guests here today, this morning, the approach, the sort of agility in organizations is not something new. Just because we've had something physically created in 2001 to support it and give it a name, I was saying earlier, agile is dead, long live agile. Yeah, I think we keep going through different iterations of this. I think the future is simply about having that sort of smartness about better ways of working in organizations, having that across the entire organization, so it's not specifically being given the label agile anymore. It's part of the norms and ways of working of an organization. And so you're right, I would like to see the word disappear altogether from vernacular at some point in the future. And perhaps actually, I make all my report, agile is dead, long live agile.
All right, well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Donovan. There's a question on the chat. I don't know whether it's facetious or whether the individual wants to stay for the next 10 hours to discuss it, but maybe in 30 seconds, your soundbite on Agile and ITIL, discuss.
Look, they both have their ways in supporting parts of the organization. ITIL processes are certainly needed there in those operational elements within an organization. That's not to say that you can't be agile using ITIL processes to support those elements within an organization, right? Again, if you are applying the approaches to get feedback from things you are implementing in as sort of short a time frame as possible, you're not putting in ITIL processes that are going to take a year to do, that you're possibly trying to implement something that's going to be on a quarterly by quarterly basis. You can then have those quarterly retrospectives and reviews at the end, applying some of that philosophy and mindset to it to get the feedback quicker, to see whether actually what you've been implementing within the organization is actually the right thing or not just letting it go off for 12 months into the future and then having to come back and actually realize that possibly some of it may have been a success, some of it may have been a failure, and you've got to do some of that failure all over again within the next 12 months. So again, it's just about applying that mindset and that approach to how you are using your processes and structures within an organization. And it's that element. Let's go back to the culture side. Having that leadership, improving that leadership, taking the word agile out, improving the structures and the processes, making them as adaptive for the organization the best way possible, getting the feedback from them as quickly as possible, is really key to actually being able to create a culture where, answering your earlier question, Frank, which have, an organization which have the most successes in being able to achieve those successful business outcomes through a version of agility or organizational agility, whatever you want to call it, in 2020 and beyond.
No, I'd agree from experience that it's not a dichotomy. If you distill Agile down to fast iterative development with feedback,
correct,
you can apply that to Agile or even waterfall processes. And there's a follow-up question around, does DevOps help with ITIL? I think the short answer is yes. The DevOps handbook, kind of the first paragraph, says exactly that. So
yes.
And
I was going to say, actually, a lot of people mistakenly still sort of go, waterfall's the enemy of Agile. I mean, it isn't, right? For the right context, there are still organizations that have to be working in waterfall ways because of the setup and the structures and the successes they currently have. That doesn't mean necessarily it is wrong. They can still apply Agile mindset approaches, garnering fast feedback, et cetera, in other parts of that organization. But waterfall isn't the enemy of Agile.
Anyone else there like to raise a question? Time-wise, time for one final one. Anyone want to be the final question of the day? No, otherwise I'll ask a final one then. So there was a kind of common theme around your talk around change culture, change mindset, change organization, change kind of approach. Have you thought or experienced using the kind of traditional change management models and techniques and applying the Agile principles within an environment of change management? So the fact that Agile is irrelevant, you're doing some organizational change and using some of those frameworks to deliver that.
Yes, as long as it doesn't become so sort of wrapped up with a veneer of bureaucracy in any way, shape, or form. You know, if change management and certain change management practices are starting to implement reports and other such legacy type approaches to understanding, you know, what's going on in the organization, you've got to be careful. I'm reading a book at the moment called Doing Agile Right, which was created by Bain & Co. out of a Harvard Business Review article they created about the Agile executive. And in it, it's very clear that Bosch suddenly sort of became a rapidly a FTSE 100 organization based with their CEO out in Germany, because they adopted this mindset and philosophy across the organizations, because of their change management approach, which actually took away some of the sort of bureaucracy, micromanagement elements, got rid of all reporting. And what he did to understand what was going on in the organization, he went for a walk around all the various different departments. He talked to the people closest to the outcomes of the actual work being done and the sort of the outcomes that are delighting the customers. He stopped all reports from then on in, and that agility has now made them obviously the #1 tooling manufacturer, you know, in the world. And it's because this guy came along. He was promoted to CEO after he actually did the agile transformation within the organization as well. And they're just going from success to success. Just watch their share price. Keeps going up and up and up. Not that I'm doing any insider trading.
Any final questions there from the group? Cool. If not, then that leaves me just to thank Giles for a very informative and very thorough talk. And maybe if you want to just share your email or your last slide, then people can.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just put that back up on screen. There we go.
Brilliant.
Thanks everyone for coming today and for listening to this. And as I said, if anybody wants any more information, wants to find out, get any of the sort of the pages from the slides and what have you, just feel free to give me an email and reach out on LinkedIn.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks.